So I think we should just get started. Hi, everybody. Glad to have you here. And welcome to our mini symposium on equity, inclusion, and justice in entomological collections research, or making entomological collections research more accessible. Glad to see everyone here and showing up. I'm gonna shift over to Kendra to just quickly mention our code of conduct rules. I'm sure you guys have heard them a few times, but just to mention them, the QR code for that is also on the screen.
Yeah, so the long and the skinny of it is that the ECN code of conduct still applies to the virtual events just as much as the in-person ones. We're gonna ask that you guys keep your mics muted, and you're gonna use the chat function to reach out if you have any tech questions you need to ask, and we have some folks from ECN here who'll help you with those. You're gonna use the Q&A section to ask the speakers questions during their pre-recorded talks, and they'll get to them after. This probably won't come up, but us moderators, me, Nat, and Antonio, we do reserve the right to boot anyone if we need to. Probably won't happen, just keep it in mind.
Thanks, Kendra. And yeah, I'll just quickly mention that my name is Nat. I am a graduate student at Oregon State University. It's my first year, and I'm working in David Madison's lab along with Antonio and Kendra, who I'll let introduce themselves. Go ahead.
Hey there, I'm Antonio Gomez. I'm a PhD student, like Nat mentioned, here at Oregon State. And I guess we should do intros first before diving into our reasons for hosting the seminar. So I'll let Kendra introduce them.
Cool, so my name's Kendra. I'm a recent undergraduate from Oregon State University. I graduated in Ent. I worked in David Madison's lab, which is where I met these cool folks. And I also worked in Dr. Sagili labs and Dr. Rivers' lab as well. My motivation for this symposium is with the fun slew of minority identities I have. EGI is something that I have to be very passionate about, but luckily it's something I enjoy as well.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add to what Kendra is saying. We were really, really excited to host this symposium and to kind of, it's a very timely topic right now. And the question kind of has come up a lot of how do we combine everything that's happening with EJI and justice and talk about it in our field and how is it affecting our field as well. And I'm queer, I'm Black, I occupy a lot of minority identities as well. And you kind of, I've noticed that there haven't always been a lot of role models in entomology for me to look up to, and then that look like me, and then the ones that look like me or are in the same kind of minority realm that I am, because there are so few of them, I kind of idolize them and put them into God status and think like, there's no way I could ever be that good. Because I just think to myself like, wow, like they did it. They're a real entomologist. So we really wanted to have this symposium to talk to some of these real entomologists who really did it and kind of make it more accessible for everybody and just be able to talk to our idols. Yeah, go ahead, Antonio.
Yeah, I mean, so Nat brings up a lot of really good points about connecting with mentors, and our institution, our department is getting into EJI efforts, and there's faculty and graduate students who are very involved here. And I'd be curious in the chat if you all can share sort of what exciting EJI initiatives are happening at your institution. Also, at the end of our symposium, we're going to have 18 minutes in which we can just chat about EJI efforts that excite us and that we can plug into. For me, this is something I care about not only as a minority researcher, but also just as one who loves bugs. I think actually one of the power of bugs is that because they're very accessible. And so folks from all over the world can connect, I think, very easily over insects. I think one of the challenges we have right now is that if biodiversity belongs to the world, how do we make it accessible to the world? And so that's really, I think, one of the core challenges that we have. And we've got a great panel of students, and they're going to share what they think about equity, justice, and inclusion in entomology. And for those of you who are new to this, I'm sure you're finding out that a lot of the terms are very, there's a lot of terms, that things change very rapidly. And it's really all about growth and I think ultimately trying to stay updated, and it's not it's a continuous process. That's what I want to say. That nobody hits the point where they're just done, and forever like the most updated that they could be. We're constantly growing and learning together, and so part of this, I think, my motivation was just to connect with my community and get us all talking about equity, justice, and inclusion. So with that, I'm curious whether we're at time or whether we have a little bit more time to talk.
Yep, Tonio, it is 11:36, and I think I'll let you introduce our first speaker.
Okay, so I sadly might have to defer to you there, Nat.
Not a problem.
Stop sharing, and I will pull up the program here.
All right, it looks like the video is queued up. So our first speaker today is actually going to be one of the moderators. It's Kendra Del Toro, and they are going to be speaking on fostering diverse thought.
Hi, my name is Kendra Del Toro, and I am one of the 3 moderators for this panel. And what I'm angry about this week, this month, this year, this decade, is the conflation of diverse bodies with diversity. Academia, and specifically professionalism, stifle creativity, which is the lifeblood of scientific exploration. We cannot have diversity in science without allowing and encouraging diversity of thought. We can stuff 400 brown, black, and indigenous bodies in a room, and it doesn't matter one whit if we are demanding that they filter themselves through a sieve designed by, supported by, and validated by 60-year-old cishet white men. Science has been getting more physically diverse, sure, but we as scientists and professionals are still forcing students to become westernized and to strive for whiteness, to be considered professionals, experts, or to be worthy of basic scientific acknowledgement. To tie this into entomology, let's talk about sperm real quick. My species description mentor, and the person who kind of got me thinking about this, is Antonio Gomez, PhD, and one of the other moderators for this panel. Antonio studies beetle sperm, and as such, he finds that his science is heavily influenced by Antony van Leeuwenhoek, the father of microbiology. Leeuwenhoek set a precedent in how we scientists document newly discovered species. Leeuwenhoek didn't invent the microscope, but he invented the technique of layering single optical lenses of different magnifications to study what he described as the small animals around him. And in the wise words of my mentor, he did what any man would do after discovering microorganisms. He looked at his own sperm. This discovery and description of human sperm set a precedent in how we describe new species. Female genitalia is largely ignored, and male genitalia descriptions are a required piece of species description. Maybe not required, but people think it's weird if you don't include it. And I'm not gonna completely blame that on Leeuwenhoek. I know he was a product of his times, but I don't care. He ignored female genitalia based on his well-documented preconceived notion of the human female's role during procreation, i.e. passive, and only described male genitalia based on his notions of the male's role during procreation, i.e. active. And his colleagues followed suit. And this created what we have today, which is over 400 years worth of detailed data on male genitalia and few and far between female genitalia descriptions that go to the same depth. And this biased view of describing new species has continued into today as well. And these aren't just the musings of a spurned feminist brown entomologist. This biased view of describing new species has been documented in PLOS Biology, covered by National Geographic, and even published in Nature. I want to pivot slightly, quickly, into talking about diverse thought. The scientific method in relation to allowing diversity is flawed. Researchers insert their own biases into rigorous academic pieces all the time, Leeuwenhoek, but there's no space to talk about this bias because the scientific method is sterile. Indeed, the emphasis on separating the researcher from their research, while impossible, also does a disservice to science. It takes away our ability to speak out on it while also forcing the diverse people being brought onto these teams to think in the same way as their counterparts, and this is not diversity. Diversity is diverse thought. Hawaiian institutions have seen this pattern and begun emphasizing Pono science, P-O-N-O, as a way to bridge the gap between indigenous and Western systems of knowledge. In this way, diverse people can still contribute their diverse thoughts, voices, and experiences that make their science so good. There are so many ways to do good science, and forcing scientists to adhere to one Western way is a disservice to science as a whole. My solution for non-traditional students, queer, trans, Black, intersex, and other Indigenous people of color, is to take up space. And this sounds cute, and I know we've all heard it a million times, but I mean it. Throw philosophical and maybe literal elbows. Make these folks around you understand that if they want westernized white ideas, then they can hire westernized white people. And as for folks who are professors or researchers or just generally no longer students, I would challenge you to see where and how you encourage westernization, assimilation, and whiteness, even as people of color. An easy way to do this is to look at your citations and co-authorships. Who do you cite in your papers? Do you give the indigenous guide who showed you around Madagascar as you collected your samples co-authorship based upon their deep understanding of your organism's ecology? Do you cite a local story that indigenous people have been telling each other and anyone who asks for hundreds of years about the red shrimp in the alkaline pools that you just recently discovered in Hawaii? We, as queer, trans people of color, or as allies, have a unique and beautiful relationship with science that is just as established and valid as the majority. True scientific diversity requires more than diverse bodies in a room. It requires the allowance and encouragement of diverse thought.
That was excellent. I'm so glad that we were able to hear from Kendra. Again, we're going to have, instead of question periods after each talk, what we'll do instead is we're going to have that large question period, the 18 minutes at the end of the talk. So just a reminder for that. So I'll launch right into the next talk. And again, we can save our questions for a larger question period at the very end. The next talk is going to be promoting the digitization of Latin American entomological collections using Symbiotic portals. And this was by Samantha Orellana from Arizona State University.
Hello, everybody. My name is Samantha Orellana, and I am a PhD student at Arizona State University. Today, I am going to present a little bit about my work promoting the digitization of Latin American entomological collections using Symbiotic portals. Well, I am from Guatemala, so I am Latin American, but I am currently based in Arizona at the ASU Biocollections. As a part of my research here, I am in charge of processing and digitizing entomological specimens using the Symbiotic portal Digitize, managed by the bioinformatics team here at ASU. While I was learning about the digitization process in this portal, it became obvious that it was a great solution to digitize the collections in my home country and other Latin American countries. And why is that? Well, Ecdysis and the rest of the Symbiotic portals are open access and free to use. Also, these portals are really easy to use and have all the necessary features to facilitate the collection's management. As an extra benefit for Latin America, most of Ecdysis is now available in Spanish. So, by January of this year, we made the first attempt to digitize an entomological collection from Guatemala. This was the collection at Del Valle University, led by Dr. Jack Schuster, an American entomologist and a world authority in pasalids, and by Dr. Jichiro Yoshimoto, a Japanese entomologist also based in Guatemala. With several collaborators and students involved, the whole process was relatively easy to start, and a couple of months later, the collection has most of its type material online. There is still a long way to go with more than 100,000 specimens yet to be digitized, but this is a good start. Del Valle collection even has a GVIF profile now, which makes it the only Guatemalan entomological collection in this platform. After this successful attempt in Guatemala, collections from other Latin American countries also started to join Ecdysis. For example, entomologist Jairo Mora from the University of Costa Rica in Guanacaste is starting a regional entomological collection focused on insects of agricultural importance, and is now using Ecdysis to digitize it. Entomologists Joseph Aguirre and Tomás Rios from the University of Chiriquí in Panama are now also using Ecdysis to digitize their aquatic insects collection. At this point, there was no doubt that Ecdysis was a very useful tool for Latin American entomologists, so I began to promote its use even more. I made a series of virtual talks and workshops to help more people to learn how to use Symbiota, mainly in Guatemala. However, it suddenly became something international thanks to social media and academic social networking on ResearchGate. The Symbiota portals became so useful in Guatemala that Ed Gilbert designed a Symbiota portal exclusive for the country. It now contains 3 entomological collections plus 14 collections of other groups. The other 2 entomological collections from Guatemala are both from San Carlos University, one based in Guatemala City, led by Dr. Enio, and the other one in the regional campus of Zacapa, in charge of Dr. Manuel Barrios. So, by October, we had 5 new Latin American entomological collections online, thanks to the Symbiota portals. We are really happy with the results, and we are still waiting for collections from other Latin American countries to join the portal. This is a very important step in the inclusion of local curators in entomological research. Finally, I want to thank all the team of the ASU BioCollections for their support, especially to my PI, Dr. Nico Franz, and to Ed Gilbert for creating the Guatemala portal and for giving us access to the other Symbiota portals. Also, thanks to all the Latin American institutions, curators, and students involved for their support. And thanks to you for your attention. If you have any comments or questions, I'll be really happy to answer them now. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Sam. That was a great presentation. And there's a question already here in the Q&A for you. And just as a reminder for other panelists, as you're seeing those questions come in, feel free to answer them as they come in. I will take it from here and introduce our next speaker, who is Stefanita. Stefanita Mafla-Mills, who is going to be talking about Entomologists of Color, an initiative for diversity in entomology, for diversifying entomology, excuse me.
Hi, I'm Stefanita Salkatua Bonakawa Mafla-Mills. On behalf of Ento POC, I'll be talking with you today about Entomologists of Color. It's an initiative to diversify entomology. And it might be helpful for some if we consider this in terms of scales of diversity, that we're striving for belonging through diversity, equity, and inclusion at different scales. On the 10th of June 2020, 5 months to date now, we were led by the group called Particles of Justice and moved by the murder of George Floyd and countless Black and brown people over generations to come together to strike for Black lives and to shut down STEM. We paused from our research to acknowledge the hundreds of years of racism working against Black and brown communities. And our goal was to reckon with the racist roots firmly grounded within entomology, science, our country, and the world at large. We wanted to rise to the challenge to identify tangible ways to support people of color in our own entomological community. With that convening in June, Entomologists of Color was born, with our labor focused on recruitment, retention, and activism in entomology. We felt strongly that as a collective of scientists, our first step towards seeking change would be to clearly identify the gaps in diversity in entomology, and that we could make the most change to move entomology forward by first evaluating the data, then publishing our findings and a call to action in the American Entomologist. So first, to determine the levels of representation among racial and gender groupings, we collected demographic data on graduate student enrollment through the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics and the National Science Foundation. This graph here shows the intersection of race and gender representation across all STEM graduates. The radius of the gray circles equals the value if the proportion of students in that field is equal to general population. The left half show male representation and the right half show female representation. And as you can see here, although exclusion of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, is widespread across graduate population of biological sciences, It's particularly acute in entomology and parasitology and ecology. Now, this graph shows the racial representation of women in STEM, from undergraduate degrees to employed scientists. The NSF data from 2017 shows that while white female proportions increased through higher education, you can clearly see a steady decline in the number of all non-white, non-Asian women who are enrolled in biological sciences from the undergraduate to professional employment levels. So with that data clearly identifying BIPOC missing from our field, we identified specific barriers excluding BIPOC from belonging. And we proposed a few solutions, including increasing meaningful entomological experiences for K through 12 students and targeted mentorships to overcome identity barriers. Financial assistance, scholarships, travel awards, internships, and grants could help combat resource barriers. Advocating for departmental inclusions, DEI training, more targeted recruitment, and rewarding pro-diversity activities could help combat recruitment barriers. And calling for strong institutional support, anti-bias and harassment training, workplace harassment penalties, and an even distribution of achievement awards could help overcome retention barriers. From day one, we felt that it would be a membership initiative that could lift excluded folks, and that focusing on student memberships and access to education, networking, and career opportunities that memberships to entomological and arachnological societies provides, we could hit the ground running. We turned to the entomological community and beyond to raise funds for student memberships to diversify entomology together, because we need to do this together. Through the power of social media and good old word of mouth, we have been able to give away 249 memberships to date. The effort is also a global effort. We're not limited to students solely in the United States or European countries. We span all of these countries, and we're expanding beyond them. In terms of retention, we have given away 40 free registrations to NSOC 2020 this year, thanks to the support of the Entomological Society. ECN discounted registrations for ECN 2020. Thank you, ECN. We have a mentorship program for NSOC 2020. And we had engagement at SACNAS, and we're starting a journal club with Dr. Beatty, and considering longer term mentoring circles going here on out. In terms of our advocacy, we hope to continue this momentum and spark more conversations and action focused at different levels and tailored to the needs of different institutions, regions, research, and people involved to achieve the ultimate goal of diversifying entomology, which is belonging. We're working with the North American Forensics Entomology Association, NAFIA, and other agencies on policies to prevent bias. And advocacy is something that we're going to be working on for years, months and years to come. Going forward, we'd love for you to join us. We'd love to hear more ideas for recruitment during the pandemic and beyond, maybe more mentor matches beyond NSOC 20 and ECN 2020, more entomological collection tours and workshops perhaps, and we'd love to discuss the opportunities for helping you with REU recruitment. Just connect with us. I just wanted to include this quote from the SACNAS conference this year, and to remind everyone that these spaces are for all of us. Our ancestors were architects, fine artists, mathematicians, astronomers, agricultural experts, poets, politicians, athletes, inclusive lovers. They had space for non-binary people and so much more. Just remember that these spaces are for all of us. With that, I just wanted to thank you all for your time on behalf of Entomologists of Color. Please reach out to us if you have more ideas, you want to volunteer or mentor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And now we are going to hear from Kristen Jade from the University of Maryland on perspectives from a new student.
Hi, my name is Kristen Jade. Thanks for coming to my talk at the Ecological Collections Network meeting of 2020. I'm presenting to you from the University of Maryland College Park, which sits on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank people. I'm going to present to you today a short anecdote of my perspective as a new student. Thanks to the moderators for inviting me to do this. It might be more like a Tales from the Field talk, we'll see. And thanks to all of you for being here and listening. So I'm a new student. I've been a graduate student for about 10 weeks at the time of this recording. I'm in the Entomology department, and I'm simultaneously pursuing a graduate certificate in museum, scholarship, and material culture here at the University of Maryland. In coursework for part of that program, I was asked to lead a discussion on decolonization methodologies and non-Western models of museums. As I dug into this topic, I was feeling like a lot of this material was framed in the humanities. What I really wanted to get at was, as a new entomologist, ecologist, and museum worker, how does decolonization relate to my work? So I turned to the ECN listserv to address the professionals who are doing the kind of work that I'm hoping to do in the near future, and not just to frame the discussion for this one class, but to sort of frame the direction of my graduate research. Like many of you, I'm feeling particularly disconnected from peers and mentors at this time, and I really wanted to hear what resources have connected for you in thinking about how you navigate your work. And responses came pouring in. I was surprised and grateful for really thoughtful and engaging replies, pointing me in the right direction. So thank you if you were among the many people who responded to that post. I was given responses that ranged from just general support for asking questions like these, to pointing me to interesting readings like that of Subhadra Das and Miranda Lowe on decolonizing natural history, to being asked to give this talk as part of the Equity, Justice, and Inclusion session. Well, what do I do now? Do I even have a voice in this conversation? What is decolonization anyway? Well, decolonization is an intentional process of dismantling the imposed superiority of Western ideologies and approaches. The very nature of natural history collections and museums, which I love so much, is a very colonial thing. From the way that we name and catalog specimens to the ephemera that we choose to archive along with this information, and the way that we teach new generations of scientists and museum workers, these things are legacies of colonialism. These legacies overlay my own research and career interests, which I sort of diagrammed for myself and have shown here in this Venn-like figure. I'm going to call your attention to the accessibility and collaboration circle at the bottom right. A legacy is not a bygone relic of the past. These are current and ongoing issues, as we can see in this conversation in ResearchGate on why type specimens are not kept in their region of origin. It's clear by this conversation that people have really strong feelings about this and are willing to engage in hard conversations about why and how we choose to do things the way that we do them. So it's here that I enter this conversation as a new student. And again, I'm white. I speak English with an American accent. I'm a mature student, which, in addition to implications about how one should behave, paired with something like a coffee cup, means that more often than not, I'm assumed to be faculty than a student. Less visible is my status as a non-traditional student. I'm a first-generation college student. In fact, I just graduated last year from my undergrad, and that means that I'm pretty naive to some norms within academia and research in general, and it's that position that allows me the ability to question a lot of things from within. This questioning has led me to the perspective that we are at a unique moment in history. We are having hard and necessary conversations about equity, justice, and inclusion, and we're acknowledging that we sometimes get it wrong. We're listening to voices that have not been included in the past, and we get to choose the direction that we want our field to move toward through these kind of conversations. Decolonization is inclusion. Thank you for including me in this discussion at the inception of my new career. I am really excited to be learning from each other, and I'm so glad to be here today. 5 minutes is way too short for this conversation, so if anything I've said is unclear, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Up next, we are going to hear from Aaron Krachilski from Cornell University on White Lies of Global Collaborations and the Impact of Colonization on Bee Biodiversity Knowledge.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. Today, I'm going to discuss barriers I have observed in bee research. So, as many of us know, bees are in decline. There's been a sharp decrease in species richness over the past 20 years, and they're among the most vulnerable insects due to both anthropogenic and environmental factors. Bees are essential to both agricultural sustainability and ecosystem function. A follow-up question that is seldom addressed is, where are bees in decline? So, if we look through the literature, in about 50 results, only 2 studies focus on bees in the global south. Our recent review also highlights this bias, finding across insects most studies come from US and Europe. This study looked at global biodiversity information records of bees and found the same continental skew. They also highlighted that up to 75% of bee GBIF records came from North America alone. And the publication frequency is higher in the global north, despite the fact that most diversity does not lie there. So, why do we have this bias? Well, for one, honeybees have been put on almost every continent around the globe by European settlers. Also, most bee species descriptions have been carried out by a small subset of individuals. I'm going to focus on Taiwan as an example. So in Taiwan, 99% of researchers that described the bee fauna are from outside of the country. And for those that don't know, Taiwan is a nation between Japan, the Philippines, and China. And Taiwan has been colonized by 4 different countries. Understanding that, we can look at this timeline of where folks were from that described the Taiwan bee fauna. There is a huge research gap due to the fact that a lot of these folks took the material to their home countries, leaving lack of resources here for local researchers. And the historical context is important because it also creates language barriers. So on the left here is a book that's commonly used to translate the old Japanese names for Taiwan places into their current Chinese names. On the right are publications from the early 1900s on Taiwan fauna, published exclusively in English and German. So again, there are many reasons for these biases, but I'm just going to focus on these 2. And this is not a new problem. It is often discussed how the prestige in our museums originate from stolen and appropriated material. What can we do about this as a community? Well, we can start by understanding the context in which our research takes place. And this is not to call out any individual or group, but really a call to action to normalize new processes in our taxonomic methods. And now I'm going to talk about some of those potential steps for change. So using those 2 barriers I mentioned before, we can collaborate, share, and publish. For location of voucher specimens, I'm working on this database of bee researchers in the global south. And you can use this to involve local researchers on collecting trips as well as descriptions. And this will be open source and in map format. Many of us being taxonomists, we understand that there's a lot in a name, and we can be more intentional to ensure that the names are relevant to the originating countries. Can also, of course, share. So if you collect in a location, donate your materials to those local museums. Also send material to those countries, and or digitize specimens, as that is still very useful data that a lot of folks may not have access to. And publish with local researchers. This is essential. With working towards eliminating language barriers, we can learn the language in which we are conducting research, and if not, involve local researchers to ensure that what is being communicated is agreed upon. And it's important to understand and acknowledge the privilege we have being from the US, both in respect to language privilege and passport privilege. An example of that is field stations around the world. Folks that are from places where those stations are may not be able to conduct research in their local language and instead would have to learn English, whereas we wouldn't have to learn anything. So that's a huge bridge to gap. Also, differences in languages such as alphabet make it hard to translate them and thus understand the fauna. In Taiwan, we're working on creating a bilingual checklist to increase accessibility as well as reach a broader audience. And again, share as widely as possible. I'm also trying to collect journals that allow you to publish bilingual, as I think this is a great way to create more connection. So these are just a few examples of action steps we can make, and I'd love to hear what folks have already been doing. With that, bees are in decline, so let's work together to save the bees and make taxonomy an equitable place for all. My final thoughts are that we should acknowledge the Eurocentrism built into our museums and collaborate with folks from the Global South. I'd like to say thank you to the incredible folks that I've had the opportunity to work with over the past few months. I won't say names because I don't want them to be responsible for any controversial opinion. And with that, thank you so much, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that very informative talk. Oh, these talks have been so great. I'm so excited. Our next speaker is going to be Andrew Johnston from Arizona State University, and they're going to be talking about breaking biodiversity data barriers by empowering individual contributors. So let's hear that talk.
Hi, today I'd like to talk about empowering individuals with regards to biodiversity data in our collections community. So we know that we're in an era of big data, and this is very important to collections. This is what we think about. This is what we do. We're trying to digitize our collections. We have 1.6 billion records aggregated on GBIF. This is very important to us and to our community. We also know that entomology and collections have both historical and current challenges with regards to equity, justice, and inclusion. There's a lot of literature out there, and especially about the historical issues, and a simple Google search will show you current issues with our institutions and scientific societies. So we should know about these things. And we also can look at some simplistic metrics just on diversity. And we know that we lose diversity as we go from undergraduate students to graduate student bodies to employed faculty and staff. And of course, ethnic diversity is not the only thing we should be considering when we think about diversity. And more importantly, we know that diversity does not equal inclusion. And inclusion should involve things like participation and contribution. And to increase inclusion, we need to be thinking about things like alternative metrics and giving credit to individuals for their work. And to just really develop social and scientific incentives for all individuals to participate and to get credit for what they've done. And so we can think about our insect specimen data. We have those that are kind of currently empowered and in the data loop. We have museums and university collections and many of the staff there. We also have this really broad user community of specimen-based entomologists. And I was one of the privileged trainees to kind of live in that intersection where there were tools and training and resources available to me to learn about biodiversity data while I was also doing specimen-based research. And so I want to really think about empowering individuals at all levels, especially throughout academia. And so we can start with undergraduate students. Are we teaching them digitization from the field to their collection-based courses? Are they taught data standards and how to access collections data online? And then if we think about those that are doing research with us or that are student workers in our institutions and collections, are they learning data science beyond the level of data entry? And let's say that they digitize 1,000 specimens or take 200 images for our collections. Are they able to point to your online portal to their work and link that to their CV, their website, their LinkedIn? And if not, why not? And so we can think about things like iNaturalist, which is already being incorporated in many educational platforms, but I bet that iNaturalist is doing more to credit individuals than most of our collection portals. You can actually track this record from the point that somebody found it in nature to it going on GBIF and their name is with it. Are we giving the same credit to those undergraduate students working with us in our collections? Similarly, we can think about graduate students. Do they actually have access to biodiversity data tools to digitize and share their research and their specimens that they've collected? Are they included and empowered by institutions to contribute data edits, georeferencing, determination annotations to the specimens that they loan from you, or the curatorial work they do when they visit your collections? And are there publication and research output avenues that give them credit for their specimen work that they can actually put onto their CV and that they can link to? And one good example of this is Bionomia. It used to be called Bloodhound Tracker. You can claim specimens in GBIF as either being the determiner or the collector of this. This is great, but are graduate students having to rely on institutions to digitize all of this data before they graduate so that they can point to it and get credit for it and continue and advance their career? We need to bring them in at all levels of the pipeline. And we can also think about individual researchers, from well-funded PIs or postdocs to avocational entomologists. Do they have tools available to digitize and to involve their own work, their own collections in our online biodiversity data ecosystem? And again, are they included and empowered by institutions to get credit for their curatorial and identification works within your institution? And are they really just empowered by the whole ecosystem, by everything that we're doing when we think of collections, databases, and portals and networks? So in the future, I think it's very important that we keep digitizing and have an emphasis on large collections. They're amazing resources. There's no way around that. But in that, we can't lose sight of the individuals, and they should be empowered to partner with institutions in data generation, data cleaning, and in all of these workflows and goals that the institutions have to digitize. We also need to adapt and make available biodiversity data tools for individual use, for individual researchers. And we should encourage and promote all people from non-academic and all levels of academia to really make contributions to entomological data and data science. And so I think it's always important for us to remember that empowering individuals to contribute to biodiversity data is just one small way that we can strive for equity, justice, and inclusion within our collections community. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. So we're gonna now launch into a more kind of open, holistic question period where you can ask questions to any of the speakers that were here today. We have 18 minutes to do that, so we can get in a bunch of the questions that were asked and any questions that come up. I'll just remind you of the speakers that we already had and the titles of their talks. So that was Fostering Diverse Thought by Kendra Del Toro, Promoting the Digitization of Latin American Entomological Collections Using Symbiotic Portals, which was Sam Orellana, Entomologists of Color, an Initiative for Diversifying Entomology by Stefanita Mafla-Mills, Perspectives from a New Student, Kristen Jade, White Lies of Global Collaborations and the Impact of Colonization on Bee Biodiversity Knowledge, Aaron Krichilski, and Breaking Biodiversity Data Barriers by Empowering Individual Contributors, Andrew Johnston. So please feel free to ask questions of any of these speakers. I'm gonna go into the question and answer box here. Oh, and I almost forgot, we should probably go to the unmute button, which is traditional to do just to get a sense of what everybody in the audience felt about those talks. Okay, I'm gonna go there now. Yeah. It seems like everybody really loved the talk. Thank you again so much, speakers. All right, so let's launch into that question period now. I'll ask some of the ones that are still in the open section. We have here from Brenna Decker at Utah State, specifically towards Aaron. I'd love to hear about anything you found on journals that allow for bilingual publications. What have you found out so far? Let's see.
Are you with us, Aaron?
Might just be that Aaron currently isn't on the call or doesn't.
Yes, we have not been able to find Erin either in the panelists or the attendees list. So she was not able to join us this time.
All right, a bad one for me to start with, but that's okay, we'll keep rolling. This is another interesting question, and I think that this one was directly following the talk, I'm not sure which talk this was following, possibly Entomologists of Color. And the question was from Rachel Osborne at MSU. Is there any data about the representation of non-gender conforming folks in entomology? So I think I'm just going to open that up to any panelists. What do we know about non-gender conforming folks in entomology?
So we have several LGBTQIA+ members in Ento-POC, and we found it kind of disheartening that there wasn't as more data. But when we were also trying to collect some data across different entomology and biology departments, we had a lot of hesitancy because people were saying that's not something we should ask people, and we don't want to assume things. So I think there kind of needs to be maybe this cultural shift, or maybe just within departments themselves, as people are more open and more welcoming. You know, that's kind of a big thing. If you're inclusive, people will probably share those things with you, but perhaps that's something that we could all continue to talk about, gathering that data on our own, because going through department chairs or admins was just non-existent for us. It didn't happen.
And I will mention one database I know about that's not, exhaustive in any way, and is more about, celebration rather than statistics, is 500 Queer Scientists. This is more broad. It's not for entomologists in general, but can help us to know a little bit about the diversity in the area in terms of LGBTQIA+.
Yeah, Lorna Esposito runs that, and she's actually part of Ento-POC. So we're hoping that she'll be able to kind of ramp up some of those numbers for us.
And I think another great way, which also Stephanie, you might be able to speak to, is just the queer events or LGBTQIA+ events that do occur within these meetings can kind of help to gauge the community. So I know there's one this Saturday, anyone who wants to come. There's one, I think the person who's holding it, it's Ento-POC, but I think it's also Dr. Jessica Ware will be hosting that one on Saturday. And ECN has posted about that as well. I can't remember the exact time, but things like that can help us to understand who's here in our community.
Yeah, get a hold of us if anyone is interested. It's been a groundswell since the first year was just a few of us around a table, and then every year it's expanded, and it's been really warming to see the support and just to see other people who are comfortable coming out. So.
So I'm curious to bring up a question again that's already been asked and has been answered, but I feel like we could get some good discussion going. Given that a lot of us here in the symposium are might identify as allies or accomplices, I'm curious to hear some of the panelists' thoughts on how to expand diversity and inclusion in their institution.
This
So, go ahead.
Alex Baranowski, let me know if I'm saying that name wrong, mentioned much earlier in the chat, and I do think it ties in. I'm going to reread your comment, Alex, if you're all right with that. I flagged it because I was like, that's cool. I think it's interesting that this panel is on a tiny aspect of science, and yet we have so many problems that address that trickled into every reach of science. And I think that's cool because I think that's the necessary first step before you can start talking about diversity on an institution level, is you have to understand that it's in everything. We don't exist in a vacuum, and neither does our science, and neither does even our little bugs that we love. They don't exist in a vacuum. Every field has these problems. And I think that's a good first step, because so often you try to start talking about diversity in science and people go, it doesn't matter. Like, does it matter how many brown folks it doesn't matter how many queer folks, like we don't need to ask them. It doesn't matter because we're all doing science. We're all doing science. But yeah, I would say it really, really does matter. So I like that you brought that up, Alex, because I think that's the first step that a lot of people are really uncomfy with, is that it is insidious. It is everywhere. It is in everything. I'm sure I perpetuate it every time I open my mouth, right? It's like I can think about these things all day long, but. So I'd like to hear more about what you guys think the necessary first steps are and how we can start having these hard conversations in institutions that would rather we did not.
So I really appreciate what you've had to say, Kendra, about it's not just diverse bodies. And as an older student who, I mean, honestly, my children are much closer in age to most of my classmates in my recent undergrad. And so it's been a really interesting place to navigate because I'm always in this outside group, even though I look like the in-group of faculty. And so it's been a really interesting way to sort of feel out a space that's different. And I think what you have said about diverse thought and what Andrew has said about including people from your very earliest undergrads and respecting the work that they do, and also understanding that these things overlap each other. I mean, to use the phrase intersectional, often people who have had barriers are coming at things in different phases of their life. And so we can put these demographic boxes out for us to check, and lots of us check many of those boxes, but we're going to be coming at these things at different places and different times. And so inclusion is not about setting out enough boxes for everybody, but understanding that you can set out all the boxes and then the next person that comes into your department isn't going to fit in them all or any of them. And so that's what I'm seeing that's a difference. People want to have diversity, but they think they know what that means. They think it looks like a big colorful skin tone rainbow, but there's more to be done by just admitting that we don't know what we're doing. Like, it's okay to not know what we're doing and sort of ask people what they need.
So then, is one of the solutions putting this work on your CV? Because one of the challenges that I see happening with a lot of these efforts is that they're oftentimes led by young people who then go to other institutions and go on to have wonderful careers. But then a lot of the efforts that they began end up fizzling out. And so I often wonder about the sustainability and keeping it going. And of course, that's one of the challenges we have here at ECN, is how do we keep young people coming back to entomology, given a lot of the challenges that collections-based research has. I'm also curious what folks' thoughts are there.
And I just want to tie that in real quick. Thank you, Tonya, to a question that's in the question log, very similar. It's from Kylo Hearn at Cornell, which is just suggestions for entomologists of color who want to make a change in a predominantly white institution. How do we make a change, and how does it, not hinder or not contribute to the leaky pipeline for students of color who are trying to make a change and then end up kind of exhausted, burnt out, changing institutions, leaving the field?
I'll just pop in real briefly and say that I think this is a really critical area for why we need things like Ento-POC, but a lot of people coming into that, and not just Ento-POC, but someone said once early on in my PhD that, you know, your own advisor can't be everything for you. And we need to have kind of a network of mentors. And so we approach our undergrads in that way, and our master's students and our lab family that way. And we're hoping that we're approaching Ento-POC and sharing that with everybody in the same way, that we can connect people so that if you feel isolated in an institution where it's predominantly, you know, a group of people that are different from your own, that you have other people you can turn to. And our lives aren't set in our grad studies or master studies or undergrads. And so then moving on from those institutions, you know, we'll feel like maybe we can find a home or create a home and create more space again for other people coming after us.
That's great, Stephanie. Thank you so much. I'm very excited about Ento-POC and trying to get involved with this. I do wonder if you could quickly just, you know, let everybody know how to best get involved with Ento-POC or best support.
Yeah, so we try to be quite active on social media. So if you prefer contacting people through DMs or instant messages, we are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram primarily. And we are at entopoc@gmail if you prefer email. And then our website is entopoc.org, and all of our links to social media and the email are there. But we welcome any and all. It's called Entomologists of Color, but not only for entomologists of color, right? And we don't want to exclude people from supporting, because we know this effort is going to take everyone. So entopoc.org if you want to join the ranks.
And I'll bring up at least one more question from the chat. And this question is about provenance. So it's a large question. And the question is from Morgan Jackson, who asks, given the historical and ongoing damage natural history research and taxonomy have inflicted around the world through colonization and imperialism, how do we avoid compounding these harms through the appropriation of indigenous names and languages for nomenclature purposes, even if well-intentioned?
So I think one of the answers that showed up in the chat was from Carl Manyaka about making sure that if you're doing this, if you're including indigenous nomenclature, then include some indigenous folks working with you to make sure that you're speaking the language. Like, if, you know, again, we're back to inclusion again, but there's room for lots of people to do this work.
I also think it's important to not just include maybe the people who initially described the species, but if you know where the species came from, which we usually do because label data, to go there and talk to the indigenous folks who are still on their land and try to get some of those cultural aspects as well that don't often make it into published research when you're talking and using nomenclature.
Oh, yeah, if I can say something quickly. I think that that's one of the reasons why we have been working to include entomologists from Latin America, for example, to make them aware of the entomological research that is going on, maybe outside of their country, but that involve their country. So with this tiny exercise of the digitization of the collections, of the local collections, they are beginning to feel included and they're also beginning to get in touch with people doing research abroad or doing research in other countries that include, for example, specimens that they are collecting. And I think that that feeling of being included, it's really important to begin to work with the local entomologists and to improve this aspect of the entomological research as well.
So Samantha, there was a question about whether you had chosen some of the databases that you had used based on how accessible they were in terms of language accessibility. Was that an issue when you were choosing between options?
Yes, well, actually, I didn't look for too many options because we are working with Digitize at ASU. That's what we use here, so that's why I learned to use. And that was the reason that I choose Digitize because it's the database or it's a system that I learned how to use here. And I found it to be really, really accessible, really useful. And we have been working with Andrew and with other people here in the team to translate Digitize and other Symbiotic portals. So that has been really, really useful. But it's also useful for people to have someone to speak that speaks their own language. That has been so useful that they are sometimes afraid maybe or not comfortable reaching out to some researcher that only speaks English, and when I go and talk to them in Spanish they feel more comfortable. And that's I don't know, it's not only that the database is available in their own language, but also to have this accessibility to have someone who also speaks their own language and to understand how things work too, because it is very different to be working in a entomological collection here in the States than in Latin America. It's totally different, and you need to understand how the things work there to know what the curators need and what the researchers need. So that is also very important. Maybe not only the system or the digitization software. Yeah.
Another question in the chat that we have is directly for Stefanita, which asks from Ross Winton, are there any historically Black colleges or universities, HBCUs, that you know that have entomology programs?
We did reach out to HBCUs, and I believe there were only a couple that had specifically entomology departments. Most, they did have some that were entomologists that were in like a broader biology department. So if folks are interested in collaborating with HBCUs, we have contacts and we'd love to support their entomologists. I think sometimes their departments are just a little bit smaller, so they don't have quite the realm of entomologists to support an entire department, but they're out there.
Another question. Oh, sorry. Is there another answer coming through from another panelist? I just heard someone unmute.
It was just me, Nat, and I was going to read Sergio's question. I don't know whether you were going to go for that one.
No, go ahead, Tonya.
So Sergio brings up a really good issue here as well, which is where are the students, what is the country of origin of the students who are doing this work, and where are the opportunities? And he's pointing out that one of the issues in Colombia is that due to, he's pointing out that there are no economic resources for some of this entomological work, and so students are leaving, and that there's a brain drain. And he's asking, what possible solution do you propose for that? So this open question.
We have similar issues in Ecuador and the Philippines. And what has worked with some friends is what we call in Ecuador intercambios. So exchanges where students, particularly if we don't have the capacity for, say, molecular work, to do in Quito and in Guayaquil universities that I've worked with, if what they would love to see us champion in the States is something like that, where if we do, say, field work together in the field, that we don't leave the students there and forget that they were part of our project, and then go home and author whatever we want to author, right? But then that we have some means. It of course takes money, it takes a lot of support, but to figure out how can you then have the students come to the labs, that we have the technology, we have the resources, we have everything at our disposal in the States or in Europe, and they can also learn those technologies, because then they'll be the ones to go home to their institutions, teach that, and try to build those kind of capacities in their areas. So this is another thing that I feel really humbled that we're in this conversation, but it's a conversation that needs, I don't know, huge changes and money that none of us have, but maybe our institutions have, right? Or people out there have it or something, but it's a huge problem. You know, my parents are from our families are Ecuadorian and Filipino. We have the greatest, arguably the greatest diversity on earth. But I know that if I had stayed there, and I have friends there in both of those countries, I wouldn't be here talking to you today and publishing. That's it. And it's unfair. So that's part of why I try to include decolonization in my work, because I know that you don't have the same opportunities, but people from the States and Europe can go to those countries, name things and do the work, and Ecuadorians and Filipinos are like left. So I don't know, it's really tough, but I'm thankful for everyone to be together and just talking about it.
Thank you so much, Stefanita, because I think that that's a really good point. Like, if you're going to go into any other country to do field work, it's just really important to make sure that you're going to give back in some way, and give opportunities in just the same way that you're going in and reaping opportunities, I guess. And also I like the idea that, yeah, there should be access to, or an attempt to make sure that there's access for students to do molecular work, even if you go in and you're doing something that's more field related and then you go home and do molecular work. Well, that student didn't get the opportunity to learn any of the steps that went into coming out with the full paper and may never have that opportunity. Thank you. I really appreciate your thoughts. Another question that's in the chat is from Brian Riley, who asks, how do we legitimize the kind of credit that Andrew Johnston spoke on for non-peer-reviewed publication type products, so identifications, databases, labor, and etc., in the eyes of people who are hiring and funding science, such that the people doing the science have access to the funding and resources needed to keep doing that science?
I think that's a real difficult question, right? And that has to be community driven. And that's something that we are embedded within a larger context of maybe biology and you know, natural sciences and academia. And so it's hard for us to solve all of that ourselves. But yeah, you know, and I also see the irony in the fact that I listed a whole bunch of peer-reviewed publications to talk about the fact that we need alternative metrics, right? So yeah, what do we do about that? And I think that's a difficult question to answer that I certainly don't have, you know, great answers to, but you know, but I think that we're seeing a lot of good things where, you know, with, you know, anyone who's a graduate student out here, you should go out and you should make a record on Wikidata. You should get an ORCID ID, right? You should get a ResearchGate profile, and you should start linking all of these things now. And every time, you know, you've probably had advisors tell you you should put everything, you know, every volunteer thing you do on your CV, but every research, you know, thing that you do, somehow document that and put that online, right? We're in an era of open data and open publications and doing all of this. So find ways, there are ways out there. We need to keep developing those. And I think that, you know, and keep encouraging and seeing those things, you know, and I might, you know, well, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
If I can add on to what you're saying, Andrew, because I absolutely agree that getting your work out there as much as possible is needed. It does require a lot of footwork on the part of the underrepresented person, which is kind of one of those primary concerns too. One thing that I can think of from the institutional point of view is making sure that all policies are reviewed in terms of hiring and for tenure track position and for recruitment of students as well, or yeah, for recruitment of students, grad students, postdocs, et cetera. Just make sure that those policies are inclusive. For instance, you know, all of those efforts that people are doing in terms of outreach and things like that, just to kind of be included in the space. So like as an underrepresented person, you might be doing a lot of extra legwork at things like this, or in other ways to try to make your life a little bit more inclusive in the entomology space or in the collection space that, you know, you might notice that you're not really included in some way. So you do some outreach event, or you do some sort of networking thing, or you come up with some new way for yourself to be more included and more heard. And in doing that, you're taking a lot of time away from your collections, your publications, your what have you. And so those kind of outreach, whatever the product is of that outreach, should be included as a metric for tenure or for recruitment or for promotion in a way. And so just kind of going to admin and making sure that those policies have been reviewed and at least have some way to include outreach as, you know, something that can count towards tenure or count towards, you know, recruitment in any way. Yeah, just one thing to add.
So Nat, I totally agree with that. We need to have some accountability here and keep track of these deliverables that folks are producing. Before we part, because it's coming up on time and we've got posters and the break, I just want to take a moment to first off thank all of our panelists for creating an amazing series of videos. I really enjoyed all of them, and I loved the conversation that we got to have. But I also really want to take a moment to thank the ECN organizers for allowing us to host this mini symposium and for being patient along every step of the way when we had delays or were maybe a little not always on the ball when it came to preparing for this wonderful symposium. So I just also want to take a moment to thank you all, particularly Karen and Oliver. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of the moderators, all of the organizers so much. I think this was wonderful. I do want to quickly plug that directly following this, starting right now, we're going to have a quick coffee session for a half an hour. It's in the ECN meet and greet sheet, and it's to talk about Burmese amber. What do we do about proposed moratoria, and what is the right thing to do when it comes to provenance? So I think that kind of ties directly into what we were just talking about. But at the end of the day, I just want to say thank you so much. This was such an important conversation, and I hope we can continue to include these conversations in all of our entomological work.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you very much, guys. That was an amazing symposium, and we're very happy to have you. And hopefully in future ECN meetings, we can continue this. If you're interested, just let us know next year. And sadly, our time is up and we have to continue with the poster session now.